Welcome back. So far, we have discussed professional writing as a general category of lots of different kinds of jobs. For Project 2, we will be focusing on technical writing, a specific kind of writing that falls under the professional writing umbrella. While definitions and categories can be porous, the clearest way to illustrate the distinction between more general writing and technical writing is the role of the user. Technical writers are always composing with some user in mind. It is a user-centered type of writing, breaking down complex tasks, ideas, or processes and explaining them as manageably or as possible using everything at their disposal: clear language, visuals, digital interfaces, and more. Here are some of the things that technical writers work on. Okay, let's get this going. There we go. They work on technical procedures and illustrations that clarify steps and parts of a product in order to get tasks done or perhaps create things. They provide training and instructional materials. They also focus on medical instructions as well as designing websites that are user-focused. The work that technical writers do is absolutely invaluable. For example, we are lucky to have genius scientists who developed ways for folks to test themselves at home for COVID. Along with that, we need genius writers and communicators and designers who can find ways to help large audiences understand how to use that test. Sometimes a technical writer writes for a small, specific audience, but in this case, the audience includes a wildly diverse range of folks, people with varying degrees of education and ability to read in some target language. When technical writers do a great job, you hardly notice. When technical writers do a bad job, it's immediately apparent, and I would argue, hilarious. For example, every night before food, once daily, to be taken 4 times a day, 3 times a day, every 3 times daily, take 1, take 2, take 3, 1 or 2. I think that's my favorite one. Or you have this, you know you're in the right if you're wearing it this way, but suddenly something's gone horribly awry if you're wearing it this way. Not sure what the difference is there. And this one, I'm just gonna let you pause and read on your own and savor it. It's like a beautiful poem that I really love it. I love the emphasis on hooves, for example. But you can have your fun. So this summer, you guys are going to dip your toes into the technical writing waters by choosing a task for which you will write a set of instructions. Next week, when we meet individually, I will ask you to articulate a professional focus. In other words, you will identify a kind of professional writing job or category of jobs that you will research for Project 3. For Project 2, you may want to choose a task to write instructions that corresponds with your professional focus. Or you may just want to choose a fun task that you understand well or that you want the challenge of explaining. For homework this week, part of your discussion post requires you to propose the task you will focus on for Project 2. I will give you feedback to let you know if it's manageable for this assignment or if you need to modify it. Regardless of what you choose, the process of composing the instructions will be the same. We'll focus on that process for the remainder of the lecture. I'll walk you through the steps of planning, organizing, writing, and designing your instructions using a real-world example. A guide for how to take care of my evil cat, Booley. I'll be in Maine for 2 weeks visiting my brilliant best friend, and my house sitters need comprehensive instructions for keeping this asshole alive. He is rude to everyone, refuses to be held, will cut you so fast if you cross him. Yet he requires some specific TLC. You have to feed him medicine mixed into foods at very specific times. It's dumb, but I have no choice but to sustain him. He tolerates me and will reward my patience with some rumbling purrs every once in a while. That makes up for the constant screeching for food. While all writing requires planning, the planning stages of instruction writing are extremely important. First, you have to be certain that you as the author are as familiar as possible with the task you are describing. If you've been asked to write about something you really don't know, Seek out ways to educate yourself. Find people who already do it well and observe them as they do it. Or find a YouTube tutorial and see how other people describe or work through the process. If the task you're describing is a smaller one that fits into a larger or lengthier process, make sure you understand exactly how it fits in and be clear about exactly what the users will need to have in order to complete the task, as well as what a successful completion looks like. Before you actually write or design anything, however, you must get clear on exactly who the audience is. Instructions about how to balance chemical equations for middle schoolers will look a lot different from those targeted to a higher level chemistry class at the university level. Sometimes your instructions will be read by a small or at least very specific group. At other times, they may need to be appropriate for international users. Think IKEA instructions. They rely mostly on images and numbers rather than on words, given that folks from all over the world who speak hundreds of languages will need to buy and assemble their products. As I plan my instructions, I don't need to worry too much about teaching myself the process because I invented it. I have deep knowledge about how to keep this guy alive and relatively happy. As for the audience, it's my parents. They're still mentally sharp and they're native English speakers and readers, so there aren't any barriers there. I do think they prefer to have a physical copy, so I need to be able to print these. But they can use their phones pretty well, so I could always have an electronic version available to them through text messages or emails that includes videos if the need be. The next planning step involves thinking through the best way to organize your instructions. Sometimes the task is accomplished easily in a few steps, and so a numbered list is easiest. But sometimes it's more complex and will require numbers and bullets, or will need to be broken into stages. You may want to include an introduction that gives users an overview of the whole process before they get started on discrete parts. Materials might need to be a separate section so that they can gather everything they need before they begin. This is not necessary if the task is entirely digital or contained within one electronic device, but it may be important for more material tasks such as building or making something. If you do break it into stages, using headers to demarcate the different stages is wise. Two things to keep in mind is to remember to flag when one step is directly built on another and when two steps happen simultaneously. Readers should be alerted when one step of the process is partial and requires additional attention in the next step. Having this information may seem like overkill, but the more information the user has, the better. Lastly, think about what medium this works best in. Print, YouTube video, web page, multimedia. I decided to check out what instructional resources there were for how to tie a tie. Turns out there are tons, and the best ones make use of many modes and of multimedia. Almost all the websites I visited included at least one video, if not multiple, in which you see someone tying the tie. Tie.com had a video, let me move myself. All right. Tie.com had a video followed by an introduction. Then they displayed all the steps at once before breaking them down step by step. There was no human person inside that tie, just the tie itself. WikiHow's was the most basic, with an introduction and then a step-by-step with images of an actual human person doing the tying. A website called The Art of Manliness, possibly cool, possibly cringe, can't tell, had the most robust organizational structure. First, there was a general introduction followed by a table of contents for each tie knot. There was a video, a set of written instructions followed by the visuals with the human person performing each step separately, then all together as one. All of these examples are available on Canvas in the Week 4 module. The page is in Instruction Writing Resources, and the page is called Instruction Writing Resources and Examples, and you can click on each to take a look at which ones seem most effective. As for organizing Booley's care instructions, I do think I will need different sections. There are steps for feeding, for general maintenance, and for providing warmth and affection, which I will mark as optional. My dad is incapable of loving Booley because Booley has never really warmed up to my dad. And my dad is offended by this. He holds grudges incredibly well. The next step is actually writing the instructions. Keep in mind that there will be instances in which you want fully visual instructions, such as the IKEA moment, but usually there are at least some words included. This and the next slides contain very important information and very specific directions for how to write instructions. They correspond to pages 384 to 391 in our textbook, Writing That Works. There is a great checklist on page 389 that summarizes the advice. I will use these guidelines to evaluate your written work in Project 2. You may want to come back to these slides and to those pages, especially 389, when you're drafting and revising Project 2. First, always write instructions in the imperative. In other words, you're addressing an audience directly, saying to them, you do this. So don't touch Boolie's stomach. You feed Boolie at 5 p.m. Next, always use very plain language. This is not a genre where your prose should be snappy and interesting. If you have to use bigger, more jargon-like words, make sure to include a glossary so readers can make sense of the language. If you need to use abbreviations or acronyms, write out the whole word or set of words first, then use parentheses with the abbreviation or acronym you will use for the rest of the instructions. And make sure that if the instructions include two or more of the same thing, you find alternate terminology to refer to the second or third of those items. For example, when feeding Boolie, there are two vessels, the wet food bowl and the dry food bowl. This is so interesting. I know everyone is absolutely on board with the two vessels of the Boolie feeding. I'll reserve the word bowl for the wet food and call the dry food bowl the tray, since it does look a little like a tray. Again, riveting content. I don't know why people aren't paying me directly from Boolie Care instructions content. Always use the active voice, but that should go without saying for most professional writing. Be sure to give appropriate warnings if some task might have risks. This is especially the case when dealing with fire, ovens, stoves, hot things in general, as well as with anything involving construction. It could even be the case with crafting. Think about the casualty of clothing if some ink or paint or glue got onto a certain fabric. It's most certainly the case with my evil cat. I always leave the warning to anyone who cares for him. Caution, he is evil, he might kill you, he would laugh if he did. Do not trust his show of kindness. He is thinking of murdering you. The next several pieces of advice are tedious but important to get through, so here we go. First, it seems like you could leave out some words to save room or lessen the word count, but one often needs these tiny words to make better sense of the directions. For example, you usually need you and other pronouns. Don't say, place page in tray with printed side facing opposite. In this case, you need the word you here because it's unclear what opposite is referring to. So place the page in the document tray with the printed side facing away from you. In my opinion, this is still unclear. This is an example from the book. I think if we actually had the device, we could make better sense of this, which is why it's important for you to do the process yourself and to really work step by step with the actual materials and items at hand. Also, use short sentences in the present tense as much as possible. Furthermore, pay attention to where you place certain words. You want your verbs and objects to be right next to each other as often as possible. So take the handle after removing the cover and place it in the indentation. So the handle is the object. You're taking the handle, but you're also placing the handle. The handle, the object, is so far away from the placing verb that it becomes a little confusing. So I would rearrange this to remove the cover so you have your verb, what they need to do, and the object, and then place the handle. So this is again the verb and the object, and you have it really close to one another so it's quite clear. You also want conditional words next to the words they modify, words like always and only or sometimes. Furthermore, keep your instructions as specific as possible so that users know exactly what to do. Put yourselves in their shoes, if possible. Try to imagine that you are totally uninformed. Also be as precise as possible. So here we go. Let the liquid cool versus let the liquid cool for 30 minutes at room temperature. This makes sure that they know exactly what they need to do. And the same way that I would say microwave Bully's food, too vague. I actually microwave it for exactly 6 seconds every single time I do it. Isn't that interesting? Ooh, parts of this slide didn't reload. Show anyway. Okay, well, we're missing the rubric, but maybe it'll come back soon. I wonder what that's all about. All right, if you take a look at the rubric for Project 2, which does exist somewhere, you'll notice that it must include some visual component. The book has advice for how you might design visuals for more complex sets of instructions. It's worth reading through that section, pages 392 to 395, with your own task in mind to see what might fit your audience's needs. In the Week 4 module of Canvas, I provide a link to a resource that walks you through the process of designing visuals for instructions. A lot of it is intuitive, but I like the following excerpt. So I'll just go straight to it. Let's see if we can view this one. Oh, it really hates us. So I'm going to read this aloud to you all. One way to prepare a tutorial for any medium is to start with a 2-column table. The first column will contain each individual step that the reader needs to take to complete a task. So as you're designing it, you have one column for the steps. The second column should be your visual process column. So at first that might not include actual visuals, but you can just write some ideas for what visuals you might include. Later on, you can actually add in what those visuals will be, but this is a good way to plan that visual component to your instructions as you are creating it. So let's go back to this. Let's see if it works. Show anyway. So at the end of the day, what I want is for you to demonstrate to me that you are considering how visuals play a role in instructions. If you are not the most design-oriented person, that's okay. You will not get penalized as long as you use the analysis paragraph to explain what your thought process was behind the visual you end up using. You may attempt to draw something, for example, that helps users make sense of a process or a piece of material. I will not dock you points if the drawing isn't perfect, but I would like to know why you chose this drawing and how you might improve it with greater resources or with access to a design team that could help you realize your vision. Best of luck as you get started. Feel free to come back to this video or to chapter 11 of the textbook as you draft and revise your instructions.